I am going to discuss on the topic integument of amphibia, birds and mammals. The integument, that is the outer covering of the body, is commonly referred as skin. It is continuous with the mucous membrane lining the mouth, eyelids, nostrils, and the opening of the rectum and urogenital organ. The skin functions primarily to cover and protect the tissue lying beneath it. And it is abundantly supplied with sensory nerve endings, which are affected by environmental stimuli and play an important role in the communication. The integument of vertebrates bear an outer portion. That outer portion is the epidermis, and the inner portion that are the dermis, both of which bear protective derivatives. The exoskeleton parts are the two types, epidermal exoskeleton and dermal exoskeleton. The epidermis is separated from the dermis by the prominent basement membrane. Now, if we see the structure of a typical integument, the vertebrate skin is formed by the two layers. That is the outer portion. That outer portion is epidermis, and it is the inner portion. The inner portion is the dermis, or it is known as corium. The epidermis, actually, it is derived from the ectoderm of the embryo and formed of uniform cell types. The epidermal layer is again made up of two layers, stratum corneum and stratum germinativum. The stratum corneum, it is the outermost deadest layer, and that is made by dead horny cells that having large amount of waterproof insoluble keratin protein. The stratum germinativum, it is a living layer, and the cells undergo mitosis and added new cells in the upward direction. The epidermis may contain melanophore and chromatophore and has no blood vessel. Whereas the dermis, that is situated beneath the epidermis, and it is a thick and flexible layer, and it is made up of two layers, stratum spongiosum and stratum compactum. The first outer layer, the layer is a loose, and the second layer, that layer is a compact layer. Dermis contain blood vessels, nerves, muscles, pigment cells, collagen and elastin fibers. The integument, that is one of the largest organ of the body, and that making up 15% of the human body weight. The epidermis produces hair, claw, nails, horns, baleen plates, and some types of scales also. The dermis gives rise to dermal bones. If we see the scales in vertebrates, one of the most important illuminating product of the skin in terms of phylogeny, that is the scale. In many vertebrates, the body is covered with scales for the protections. On the basis of structure and the mode of development, the scales are mainly of two categories, epidermal scales and the dermal scales. The epidermal scales, that are the cornified derivatives of the stratum germinativum, and that found in amphibia, reptiles, birds, and certain mammals also. Some exceptions are also present. They are usually shaded and replaced from time to time. Whereas the dermal scales that are located in the dermis of the skin and that are mesenchymal in the origin. The space scale, that is a bony product primarily of the epidermis. The osteoderms of the reptiles may be homologous to the space scales also. The dermal scales are not shaded. Now, integument in amphibia. The epidermis of the amphibia, that is composed of several layer cells, and it is the first to have a dead stratum corneum. The epidermis is 6 to 8 cell layer thickness, and that divisible into 3 layers: stratum corneum, stratum germinativum, and basal cellular layer that is contact with the basement membrane. Now, a dead corneal cell is an adaptation to terrestrial life, protecting body and preventing excessive loss of moisture. The dermis is relatively thin. The dermis is relatively thin, and it is composed of 2 layers. Outer layer, that is a less compact layer, stratum spongiosum, and the inner layer, that is a more compact layer, that is stratum compactum. Blood vessels, lymph spaces, glands, and nerves that are abundant in the stratum spongiosum. Chromatophore lies between the epidermis and dermis, and some amphibians have the ability to change body color with the help of pigment cells or chromatophores that are present in the dermis. Now, different types of glands are recognized in the amphibians. Mucous glands that are numerous in number, and their secretion help to maintain the moist skin. Mucous glands on the digits of some frogs and tritoads that serves as gripping. The mucous glands that are present in the thumb pads of the male neurons assist in registering female during amplexus. And next, poison gland that are usually larger than mucous glands and that secrete a substance that are distasteful or poisonous in some tropical frogs. South American frog, Kako, that produce batrachotoxin, which is most powerful neural poison. And then what you see here, that is a what of the toads, and that are the parotid glands that lie near the tympanic membrane that are actually masses of poison gland. And what in buffo, that serves as also a sensory organ. And then mental glands that are the tubular glands that's below the chin and develop as secondary sexual characters in male salamander. Cells of Leydig that are the unicellular glands of certain functions in the epidermis of some larval urodels also. In Necturus, there are numerous clubs or flacciped cells in the epidermis which secrete mucus. The amphibian skins also play important role in the respiration. In Cryptobranchus, the skin consists of maximum blood vessels for cutaneous respirations, and molting occurs periodically and consists of removing a unicellular sheet of stratum corneum. And now, what are the scales found in the amphibia? The first one is the epidermal scales. The spade foot toad that have a highly conified area of the epidermis on the inner side of each hind foot, which is used for digging purpose. In African claw toad, Genopus levis, the dark conified epidermis at the end of the first 3 digits on the hind feet that has a claw-like appearance. The salamander also has a similar structure at the end of the digits also. Now, dermal scales in Ichthys, dermal scales are present, so which are embedded in the pocket-like portion of the dermal region. They lie between the ring-like folds of the skin and alternating with other glandular structure. Large multicellular glands are present, which are holocrine in nature. Now, integument in the birds. The skin of the birds is dry and it is thin and also loose in texture. The dermis is very thin, but muscle fibers are particularly abundant, being used to raise and lower the feeder. A rich supply of sensory cells, mainly tactile stimulation that are received, are also observed. The dermis is frequently filled with fat cells. Pigments in the skins of birds is generally restricted to the feathers and legscales also. Very few integumentary glands are found, and the secretion of all have an oily component. The uropygeal gland or preen gland or the oil gland is the only integumentary gland that is a prominent swelling immediately behind the pygostyle. This gland produces an oily secretion that is called chromatum, which is drawn by the beak and is sprayed all over the body to raise the feather. The uropygeal gland is best developed in aquatic birds. It is notably absent in parrots and some varieties of pigeons also. Oil glands that lie in the outer ear canal of some domestic fowl and sometimes encircle the vent. Now, beak that are the horny exoskeleton derivatives cover the upper and lower jaw, and it is used during ingestion and preening of feather. And also claw that are the pointed surf and horny exoskeletal organs which are present at the extremities of the toes. The claws are typically reptilian in structure and that help during perching and walkings. And now, epidermal scales that is found in the birds that develop but there are no feather. That is the facial area, lower parts of the leg and the feet. And scales are particularly well developed in the feet and the base of the beak also. They generally overlap. The horny sheath that composed of modified scales that covered the beak, that is known as rhampotheca. The comb that are covered with a thick watery stratum corneum, a bony projection of the tarsometatarsus in the male of the certain species of the birds that is known as spur, and that is covered by horny scale like epidermal sheath, may be sharp and pointed. The spur is used in fighting. Spur may also occur in the wing in certain forms also. Web that is found in the feet of the aquatic birds that are modified regions of the integument, which are characteristically a scale. And the feather that cover and protect the body of the birds, they are modified reptilian scales and that are formed from the beta keratin layer. Now, come to integument in the mammals. The epidermis of the mammals that is covered externally by the stratum corneum. That layer is a stratum corneum. Then you see here stratum germinativum at the base of the base, and then stratum spongiosum, stratum granulosum, and stratum lucidum. The stratum corneum, it is the thickest layer, and that is best develops, and that is the thickest in the forelimbs and hind limbs, especially hooves, apical pads, knee pads, story, that come in contact with the substrate. In humans, it is thickest on the palm and sole region. In the stratum germinativum, the cells are columnar in shape and that arrange perpendicular to the dermis. The Langerhans cells that disperse through the upper part of the stratum spinosum. These cells play an important role in cell-mediated actions of the immune system. Stratum lucidum that is present in the epidermis of the palm and sole region. The dermis that is consisted of connective tissue fiber, nerves, blood vessels, smooth muscle fibers, certain types of glands also. The mammalian dermis is double layered. Outer papillary layer, that's the outer layer, that's a papillary layer you see here. And that layer pushes finger-like projection. That's a term dermal papilla. And the deepest layer, deepest layer is a reticular layer. And that consists of fibrous connective tissue underlying fascia. The skin is separated from the underlying muscles by a cushion of loose connective tissue, that is superficial fascia. The rich blood supply regulates heat loss from the body surface through vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Now, another types of the cells, Marek cells, that is originate from the neural crest and is associated with the sensory nerves to respond to tactile stimulation. Now, what are the epidermal scales found in the mammals? With the exception armadillos and scaly anteaters, the epidermal scales of the mammals are usually conified to tails and paw and are usually associated with hairs. In a scaly anteater, the body is covered with large overlapping horny epidermal scales, except on the ventral side. They are typically reptilian in structure, but ecdysis occurs singly. Epidermal scales give the impression of having originated as clumps of agglutinated hair. Armadillos, they have large epidermal scales which fuse to form plate-like structure, and hairs are interspersed among the scales. Scales are present on the tails of the rodents such as mice, rats, and beavers. The scales are not highly conified, and ecdysis does not occur. Ecdysis does not occur. The hairs project beneath the scales in a definite arrangement. In case of the pig, the skin is devoid of scale, but grouping of hairs or bristles give evidence of origin from the scale ancestors. Coarse hairs are usually arranged in clusters of 3 and interspersed with finer hairs. In most mammalians, the under surfaces of the hands and feet that are scaled or bear evidence of the former presence of scales, and in certain mammals, the elevated pads on the under surfaces on the hands and feet that bear fixed ridges that are known as tori. At the end of the digits, tori are also known as apical pads. On the foot of the rat, there are 11 tori. Cats pussyfoot by retracting their claws and walking steadily on tori. And you know that the baleen plates that's found in the toothless whale that having 100 to 400 broad, thin, horny sheets of oral epithelium that is known as baleen or the whalebone, which hang into the oral cavity from the palate and sidewise along its length. Each sheet is fringed along the edge, and the fringes act like combs or sheep that sustain food out of the water passing between them. And ischial callocytes that are thickening of the epidermal plates of the old wall monkey. And knee pads, that is the knee pads. That is a joint under cooling and high load protections. And then temporary thickening of the stratum corneum, which developed where the skin has been subjected to unusual friction, that is the cons and calluses. Now, what are the roles of the integuments? The vertebral integument is an organ that plays a variety of the roles in the survival of the species. The first one, protective roles. You know that the protective role of the integument is primary. Dermal armor protects the internal organ from mechanical injury. Glands secrete slimy or noxious substance. Pigments provides protective coloration and a barrier to the rays of the sun, and claws, horn, spiny protuberance, needles all confer advantage in the struggle for existence. Then number two, exteroceptive role. Free nerve ending and special cutaneous receptors in the integument that give warning of heat, cold, contact, or any kind of damage. Mucous membranes in the nostrils and over the tongue give a variety of information. Then number three, respiration. Nearly all amphibians respire through skin. A thin film of the water is retained over the surface of the skin. With the help of mucus, an exchange of gases takes place through the water film. Then number four, excretion. Excretion of carbon dioxide in some aquatic amphibians is entirely via the skin. Sweat glands are a supplementary route for excretion of nitrogenous waste in the mammals. Then number five, thermoregulation. Fur and feather insulate against cold. Sweat cools by evaporation and dilation of the small blood vessels within the dermis that increases the heat loss by radiation. And when heat conservation is necessary, the vessels are again constrict. Then number six, that is a locomotion. Wing membranes of bats, flying frogs, webs in the feet of the frogs and ducks are the folds of the integument that help in propulsion or locomotion. Then number seven, storing foods. A large amount of fat that is deposited in the subdermal parts of the skin and subdermal fat of the whale, that is called blubber, and that is about 45 centimeter approximately thick, and besides insulating the body, fat serves as reserve food. And you know, integument also serves for nourishment, mammary glands that nourish newborn mammals. And another responses, sexual selection, bright color and ball patterns that are related to sexual habits and apparently attracts mates and perhaps establishes territories. And you know, another functions that's a protect from the enemies, the derivatives such as the scales, hairs and their modifications, feathers to some extent protect the body from the attacks of any kinds of enemies. And mimicry, you know, color of the skin and derivatives may conceal the animal in the environment or blend its outline. And changes of color are caused primarily by position of pigment granules within the highly branched pigment cells. And when concentrated around the center of the cell near its nucleus, the pigments forms too small a spot to be perceived by the naked eye. However, when it is dispersed far out into the cell, it occupies a much larger area and thus can be easily detected. And these color changes are controlled by the stimuli such as light, hormones, or by a combination of these factors. And in birds and mammals, the change of such type of the color that cannot take place reflexly because the pigment granules within the cells cannot aggregate and disperse quickly. These animals can change their color only when pigment granules are synthesized or when these feathers or hairs replace the old ones. And these are the morphological color changes. Whereas the dermal or chromatophores, as the chameleons, are responsible for rapid color change, which is called physiological color changes. And also integument also serves for various give rise to various other modifications, such as several forms of claws, hooves, horns, antlers, all confer advantages in the struggle for the exception. And these are the reference books: Elements of Quadrate Anatomy, Weikart and Fritsch; Comparative Anatomy of the Vertebrates, Kent and Miller; Integrated Principle of Zoology, Hickman et al.; Vertebrates, Comparative Anatomy, Functional Evolution, Kadam; The Vertebrate Body, Romer; Comparative Anatomy of the Vertebrates, Suction and Suctionum. And in my presentation, some figures are also collected and captured from Google image. Thank you, everybody.